Welcome to XO News TV. I'm Michael Sala. I'm very pleased to welcome back Craig Campobasso, producer of the short film Stranger at the Pentagon. In part 2, we continue to learn about the information Frank Stranges claims to have received from Valiant Thor, a highly evolved extraterrestrial being that was a guest of the Eisenhower administration for 3 years. Craig informs us about a meeting Frank Stranges had with Robert Kennedy, who had questions about the assassination of his brother and whether he should be a candidate for the 1968 presidential elections. The meeting gives implicit support to claims that President Kennedy met with human-looking extraterrestrials during his administration, and possibly even Valiant Thor himself. Craig also revealed that according to Frank Stranges, Valiant Thor maintained direct communications with President Nixon, and that Stranges even acted as an intermediary between Nixon and Thor. If true, this was done despite opposition from shadow government authorities managing extraterrestrial affairs. This suggests that one of the reasons behind the Watergate scandal was to remove Nixon before he could reveal any of the truth behind extraterrestrial contact. Craig discusses his own experiences with Valiant Thor and his crew members and what he plans to do in the full feature-length movie of Stranger at the Pentagon. We hope you enjoy this fascinating interview. Craig, welcome back.
Thank you.
So at the end of the part 1, we talked about the incident where Bobby Kennedy visited Dr. Frank, and that he asked questions about who killed his brother and whether he should run for office. And of course, that advice, or the answer that he was given, was to wait another 4 years. And of course, that didn't happen apparently. And Bobby Kennedy was assassinated like his brother. So this kind of raised the scenario which you discussed about John Kennedy actually having his own relationships with Valiant Thor. I wanted to talk about another president who had relationships with Valiant Thor, and that is Richard Nixon. Of course, earlier on, you said that Richard Nixon, along with President Eisenhower, was in favor of the proposal that Valiant Thor had developed for the Pentagon, and that the military advisors of Eisenhower overruled them, or basically said no. So what happens now? President Nixon gets elected in 1968, becomes president shortly, not that long after Robert Kennedy is assassinated. So now we have a new president, President Nixon, who knows about Valiant Thor, that probably knew what happened to the Kennedy brothers. So can you tell us a little bit, or whatever Frank Stranges told you about Richard Nixon?
He said that he did continue his friendship with him, and that Nixon did seek out his advice from time to time. And that's pretty much all I know about that. But when it came to Watergate, Dr. Frank said that Valiant said he didn't do anything differently than any other president. He's just the one that got caught.
Yes, it's often like that. Yeah. The one who gets caught is the one that kind of gets really kind of taken to town. But you mentioned that Nixon sought out his advice. Whose advice are you talking about? Dr. Frank?
Valiant Thor.
Valiant Thor.
Valiant Thor's advice. Yeah, Dr. Frank said that they did continue their friendship. I don't know if it was a weekly friendship, sometimes friendship, or sporadic phone calls, but that they did stay in communication.
Okay, so basically, somehow Valiant Thor and President Nixon maintained communications independently of whatever it was Frank Stranges had relationship with Valiant Thor. That there was a direct communication between Thor and Nixon here. That's what we're saying existed.
I believe so, and I do know that sometimes Dr. Frank was the conduit to make those things happen as well.
Okay, so we have both situations. So basically, throughout the Nixon administration, what we have then is Nixon being advised from Valiant Thor on various policies, and at the same time we have these agreements between the presidential administration or the secret government, Majestic 12 and so forth, with grey extraterrestrials and reptilians. So it seems that it's possible that what we have is Nixon seeking counsel from one group of extraterrestrials that he trusted, while at the same time the real power behind the throne was this secret government who was working with another group of extraterrestrials, the Greys.
Right. Seems to be. Yeah.
And that would give us a kind of answer to what it was that Nixon was doing that was a threat to the powers that be, to the secret government, that Watergate, that Nixon was actually set up. And in fact, there was a book called, a book written by Roger Stone, who was a long-term Nixon supporter and advisor, who actually says that Nixon was deliberately set up by the CIA to get caught through the Watergate tapings. So this was a setup, and it would make sense that actually the CIA was working with Majestic 12, with the secret government, to set Nixon up, because Nixon was communicating with these positive, human-looking extraterrestrials.
Yes.
That's a fascinating scenario, and of course, we don't know anything more than what Dr. Frank said, that Nixon continued his communications with Valiant Thor throughout his administration, right up until the end.
Yes, and I don't know what conversations took place or how any of that was, but the information that you just said that you read in the book is fascinating. I hadn't heard that till we had discussed that the other day.
Well, it kind of makes sense that any president that gets hit by a signal or there's an attempt to assassinate them, that's likely because somehow they displease the secret government, the power behind the throne.
Right.
Okay, so so that kind of like really brings to a close the relationship between Valiant Thor with presidents. Do you know of any other president since Richard Nixon that Valiant Thor had communications with?
I don't. Dr. Frank said that he was in contact with several people around the world, but that I don't know exactly who those people were. There was one gentleman who lived here, who was very elderly, who was friends with Dr. Frank, who Valiant Thor was friends with, and the crew members before they even met Dr. Frank, a Japanese man. And he now lives with them because he's well over 100, and they actually moved him on board to take care of him.
Okay, so let's now kind of like shift it over to you in terms of you learning about this case and you actually deciding that you're going to make a film about it. So why don't you kind of walk us through what happened to you that made you decide to make a film about Valiant Thor and Dr. Frank's experiences?
Well, I never set out to make the film. It all happened through a course of events, but I by trade, for over 30 years, I cast actors in movies and television. And my casting partner for 10 years was Joy Todd, who is a big casting director in New York, who moved out here. She did, I think, about 10 films for Sidney Lumet. She did Once Upon a Time in America for Sergio Leone and all of that. And she had told me she had these two friends who saw UFOs all the time. They were an elderly couple from Arizona. They were coming into town, and she wanted me to meet them. And I said, sure. So I met them, and the wife said to me, Craig, she was very sweet and a little southern voice. We see UFOs all the time. And our friend, Dr. Frank, and I just looked at her and I went, Stranges? And she said, yeah, you want to meet him? And I said, okay. And I literally was sitting with him a few days later having lunch, which I thought was going to be a fan lunch, me being the fan, sitting, talking, listening to him tell me about the story, and that would be it. And we ended up hitting it off and became fast friends, sort of like father and son. And then, oh, I don't know, some months forward, Dr. Frank called me and he said, Craig, a gentleman has called me who wants to make this into a movie. I don't know about these things. Will you come to the meeting with me? And I said, sure. I said, I've been in business all my life and I can figure it out. And he said that he had had many people approach him over the years to make it into a movie, but they all were false starts and it all fell through. So he was very disappointed. So anyway, I go to the meeting and the gentleman didn't have the correct credentials to make a film, nor had he ever made a film, and said he only did business on a handshake. And in this business, you don't do that. And anyway, I told him that I couldn't allow him to do business with Dr. Frank. So I didn't want to give this information to Dr. Frank on the phone. So I went and had lunch with him. I told him, and I actually saw a tear that he was trying to hold in fall down his cheeks. And I tried to explain to him that it's very difficult to make a movie out of a book of vignettes of stories. And then I started getting these feelings and this, and I said, well, maybe if we sat together and you started telling me stories of your adventures and things like that, that maybe we'll see how it goes and how we can piece it together. I said, but we definitely should do it from Valiant Thor's standpoint. And from that moment on, I just sort of drew up some questions and ideas, which I gave to Dr. Frank, which he shared with Thor and his crew members, he told me. And after that experience, I started feeling them around me, and I could feel their energy, and I could feel myself starting to write. And when I would write, I could almost feel their feeling body inside me, so I could feel who each and every one of them were. And I have to tell you, because they are such beautiful, unconditional, loving beings, I literally would sit there and weep with each one for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes until I could acclimate to the beauty, because they're just so beautiful on the inside. And when they share that with you, that's going back to when Dr. Frank and August Roberts say they can look right through you and see your entire soul history and love you for all of the challenges and all of the things that you've overcome. And if you need overcoming and help, they can help you by giving you advice if you ask for it. I mean, can you imagine not taking advice from an angelic? Right?
Yeah, of course.
I sit back and think about Eisenhower, Nixon, and whoever else he's ever given advice to, and if they never took it, what? I mean, it's amazing for me to even think that. So I started writing, and that was my experience. And then and this went on for a couple of years, where I would sit with Dr. Frank and we would go back and forth, and I would experience these crew members differently when I would write about them, and could visually see them in my mind, in my mind's eye. And then it came to a point where I gave Dr. Frank the script, and he said he was going to give it to Valiant. And a few weeks later, he called me and he said he gave it to him, and he said he just held it and he absorbed it, that he doesn't read. He just absorbed it. And I said, well, were there any notes? And he said, no, he didn't say anything. All he said was, tell him good job. And I said, really? No notes? And he said, no. And I said, okay. And so the next morning I woke up and I had notes swimming in my head like the rings of Saturn going around, and I had to get to the computer thing out. And that was the process over the next year of bringing the script up to a state that was more presentable, until the day that he said, tell him this one will fly. And then we lost Dr. Frank, as you know, in 2008 in November, as when he passed away. And he had fallen in his house and broke a bone in his neck. And when I met him, he was going through a crisis where he had had several operations. They had to open up his sternum several times, and he kept getting he had heart surgery, and his sternum kept getting infected. So they had to keep opening it up and doing that. And now that I look back in hindsight, I really believe that Dr. Frank would have really left the planet way back when I met him. But my feeling is that they kept him alive for me to be with him, to get all the information and to do the script. And when it was all done is when he left the planet. You see, and he was 81. That is just my own feeling on it. When I sort of look back in hindsight, because my last, he was in his room in a hospital bed at home in the last days. He got cephalitis and died instantly. But I spoke to him earlier that night on the phone. Somebody had to hold the phone here. He had a caretaker. He had one of those metal things on his head, that keeps your neck straight. So it's very heavy and uncomfortable. And he actually was crying, and he said, "Please don't ever forget me, brother," just like that.
So just in terms of how the stories, the narrations that Dr. Frank was telling you, how that translated into the book. You say that basically he was telling you all of these stories, vignettes, fleshing out what he described in the book, Stranger at the Pentagon. And I assume you're just taking notes, recording all of this. And then after that meeting with the potential movie producer fell through, then you decide you're going to write the script. And so you sit down and you start writing, and then you start having experiences kind of with Valiant Thor and other members of his crew. So was the actual writing action, you're sitting down, you're starting to write, was that how at some kind of spiritual level, emotional level, you kind of open up and then they make a connection? So they're kind of like collaborating with you.
It was a form of automatic writing which was coming from their consciousness. Yes, I totally was removed from that. So a lot of people now say, here is the most interesting part of this entire project. And I'm talking about the feature-length film. Is that everybody says, well, is all of this true? And I say, well, the storyline that I know of Valiant Thor coming and being at the Pentagon and the stories that Dr. Frank told me, yes. But in the automatic writing, that was far removed from that. That was far removed from that. And here I am writing it. So it's coming from their standpoint. So I can't really confirm or deny what parts are and what parts aren't. Of course, at the end, I take some dramatic license. You have to in a film. So in the big feature, we are saying it's inspired by a true story. But it's from the viewpoint of Valiant Thor and the crew and the members on Earth as well. The trials and tribulations that even Nixon and Eisenhower had to go through to try and really push it forward along with him, but then understanding his point of view from a created being standpoint, and seeing the disappointment and the disappointment from the vice commanders and some of the other people involved also at the Pentagon who wanted to see good prevail instead of our monetary system, because I do believe if all of this happened, money would have been eliminated off the planet.
You mentioned earlier that you had this experience with Sub-Commander Teal, who healed you of
Yeah.
very bad stomach virus. You also have told me that you had an experience with Valiant Thor at your home, where you felt his energy signature, and that was in 2001, which I assume is around
Yes.
when all of this began, when you met with Frank Stranges and started having these kind of experiences.
Yes. Yes, well, that was before I met Dr. Frank. So I moved into my condo, and when I set up the couches, and you have to remember this is 2001, I read the book in the 80s. I hadn't really thought about that book, but periodically I would think about that picture about Valiant Thor, or I may have been in the Bodhi tree and saw the picture on the wall, or been somewhere where I saw it, and or if somebody showed it to me in a book, you know how those things happen periodically. And all of a sudden, when I walked by the couches, I felt Valiant Thor's energy signature along with the other vice commanders sitting there. I didn't see them. Ever since I was a boy, I could feel and sense spirit when spirit was around, and energy, and I could see it moving around in the room as energy, and sometimes as form, but this wasn't form. I just knew that their energies were there. They were there every day. Every time I walked by, the hair on my arm stood up. Um, and I didn't understand it. But then you flash forward a few months later, then we go back into the story with my casting partner, who brings me her two friends who connect me to Dr. Frank, who connects me to this gentleman who wants to make the movie, who then I become the one who becomes the facilitator in doing this film. It wasn't something, like I said, I sought out to do, but I think all of these interconnections were there because of my I had a major spiritual awakening when I was 26, and I'm 27 now. You're not smiling, Michael. You should have laughed really big on that one. But anyway, so I've always really tried to have a really deep spiritual base, and learn from all my lessons, and really try and understand what unconditional love is, and understanding that it wasn't just about things that were going on in my life. How could I make things right with everybody involved in some kind of situation that would benefit everyone if it was in a longer timeline? Because in my earlier days, I wanted to fix everything, put it on a shelf, and be done with it. But I was only healing myself. I wasn't along for the ride. And so all of these things I became to understand learning from unconditional love, and that it's really about the whole, and it's about all of our heart interconnections and everything like that. So I really do believe that that's what happened. On the very first day that I started to write the script, I had a dream with Valiant Thor that night. I heard him talk to me. Dr. Frank always told me that he had a strong yet melodic and a soft voice all in one. It was like rich, smooth velvet, like a melt-away chocolate in your mouth, that it was so resonant that your aura would ring with joy when you heard his voice. And I got to hear his voice, and all he did was show me the path of the film, and that how they were moving obstacles and things out of the way for it to be done, and I felt that their presence would be there, helping and assisting all the way through. So when we lost Dr. Frank, I shelved it. I just figured it just wasn't meant to be, and then throughout the years, I worked on Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow as one of the casting directors, and I worked on another film called The Perfect Host. That producer did the Saw movies. Those films made a short film that accompanied their business plan, their feature-length film, and their budget, which I have all together. And what they did is that short film then went out to the investors along with the entire package. They got to see the potential of it, and those films got independently financed that way. So I woke up one morning and I felt this amazing inspiration to make a short film. And I started that journey. I raised, I think, like $6,000, which equated, after everybody got paid off on Kickstarter, to about 5,000. I started. I had one of my students. We were going to shoot it on a little Canon camera. We're going to do it like small, and I was like, God, it would be so great if we had a giant studio with a soundstage and where we could shoot. All of a sudden, one showed up, donated for free. I said, wouldn't it be great? I said, I can't get a red camera. I found a place that would give me a red camera, but I had to give them $10,000 for insurance. I have $10,000. So all of a sudden, a DP showed up with a red camera who said, I would be happy to shoot your short film. So everything I wanted showed up. Well, we even got James Cameron's visual effects coordinator to come and do our green screen and light it and do all of these things. So all these incredible people came on board. We even had our master tailor with the uniforms for the Victor One crew. I found out afterwards that he is the guy who designed and sewed the original Star Trek uniforms for their first movie. So all of these really cool little things, all these people just kept coming on board and helping, and people kept donating their time, and all these incredible crew members came on board, and all of that. And our little short film has almost 90 visual effects in it. For a short film. That is gigantic. It took well over a year to do all of those visual effects. So it really and truly was cleared for this to happen. Everything went like that. We were immediately put into the Burbank Film Festival, and we won Best Science Fiction Short. Because this story is so gigantic, they put us in the big theater. Now, we're talking about a 24-minute film. That's it. We're not talking about a feature-length film. They sold out all 275 seats at the festival, which was a first for the festival, that they had to add on another show at 11:30 that night to accommodate all of the other people who wanted to come see it. So it just kept snowballing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and so now we're just getting the whole package together so we could start going out to investors and everything. We can actually make it for about $23 million with very, very good visual effects. But we can make it even better for $50 million. Mm-hmm. Money just has a great way of doing all that. And of course, me being in the business all of this time, I've already got huge people, the top makeup person, the top costume person, who's done big, giant studio pictures, visual effects coordinators and supervisors, and I've worked with about 5 of the top producers in the business. So I'll bring one of them on board to be the overseer of the whole thing, because these things are giant. I did work on my training ground was on David Lynch's Dune when I was just out of high school. I worked on that film for 4 years and learned all about filmmaking from Dino and Raffaella De Laurentiis and David Lynch, and I was very, very lucky to meet Frank Herbert and get one of the last autographs before he passed away. Mm-hmm. So that was an amazing journey, learning about Dune as well. So
what did you tell us about some of the things that come up in the movie, like the idea of a created being? It's kind of unusual. We haven't heard that expression. People think about angels, archangels. Is that essentially what this notion of Valiant Thor being a created being is? That he's a kind of an angel or an archangel?
Well, we would look at them as angelics, and Dr. Frank always said that he would place him in the top echelon of angelics. Don't know where he actually fits in the tier of the angelic kingdom, because we do know that there are many tiers and levels, but with him being an overseer of everything that goes on here and has been for a long time, and from what Dr. Frank said, he will be here until the planet is completely transformed and joins universal society, so that everyone can be in oneness and unity and experience that, and peace will prevail on the planet. So I would say definitely yes. And from the other people that I spoke to, now the two people who introduced me to Dr. Frank actually met Valiant Thor in the 60s, and the wife actually saw him one other time in the 70s. And but they conversed with him, and they said that when he walked away, they were outside in a parking lot in Las Vegas, because the gentleman was one of the top numerologists, and he had a show there. So Dr. Frank went to see the show and sat with the wife. And now I'm not sure if Valiant Thor went to the show and saw it, but Dr. Frank said that the crew members have been known to go see shows in Las Vegas as well, and intermingle in the little town that's outside of Lake Mead as well. I'm not sure what that town's called, but I've been through it. You have to drive through it. They don't gamble, although he said he saw Don put a quarter in a machine once and he won something, and it was like tremendously thrilled, because it was, because they don't do that, but it was kind of funny. But I mean, there's always those little stories that he would tell me, these little fun side stories of when he was with them. He said you would have thought he won $1 million, and he probably won like $10. Right. So that it was fun and that type of thing. But yeah, you have a question?
Yes. So essentially, Valiant Thor is a created being, and the other extraterrestrials, his vice commanders, Don and Teal, and you describe them as
fully conscious.
Fully conscious. They are essentially Venusian extraterrestrials who live in
and they're born of man and woman, just like we are.
I see. Okay, so that's very fascinating, because that suggests a kind of hierarchy here in many advanced human extraterrestrial cultures, where you have the extraterrestrials themselves, and then you have these kind of these beings, whether you call them created beings or ascended masters or angels, that are kind of like pure expressions of divinity, if you like, and that these beings kind of like are recognized as really being important leaders, which is very different to our societies, where those that occupy leadership positions are typically those that have very strong connections with the moneyed class. Whereas these beings like Valiant Thor, their connection is with kind of divinity, unity consciousness, and evolved human extraterrestrial cultures kind of afford them or recognize them as being leaders.
Yes, and they are there for people to access to, if they were having problems within their culture, for instance, or whatever, they could converse with someone like Valiant Thor or Unaya or other created beings who are assigned to specific planets to help them oversee and overcome challenges that they may have, and let them know what would be a nice course of action for them to take for the benefit of the whole planetary kind, instead of just an immediate fix.
Mm-hmm. In the movie, the short film ends with this scene. Well, I don't want to do a spoiler, for people that haven't seen it yet. But essentially,
with Valiant Thor in peril, you can say that.
Yeah, with Valiant Thor in peril, and it shows a kind of sinister group that are behind this peril. So is that sinister group, are they part of the secret government? Are they part of a kind of an older, more ancient evil lineage, if you like? So you want to just kind of tell us a little bit about that and how you came up with that idea in relationship to all the information you had learned from Frank and the Valiant Thor literature?
The answer is no, because I can't give away and spoil the big film, because everybody wants to know what happens. Everybody wants to know what happens. But all of that information was part of the downloaded information. I can tell you that.
Okay.
I can tell you that. So there, which sort of gives everybody, but it's a great evil character, isn't it?
It is great, but I think it's kind of worth pointing out that I know you said that you do take dramatic license in there, but obviously beings or factions or groups that would arrange for the assassination of a sitting president in broad daylight, while he's being watched by the world, and we're talking about John F. Kennedy, of course, and then 5 years later arranged the assassination of his brother, who is at that point kind of all but sure to win the Democratic primary. I mean, that shows that there is a very powerful, sinister group behind the scenes that will basically stop at nothing to ensure that their interests are not threatened by, kind of do-gooders or those that want to work with more positive, enlightened beings such as Valiant Thor. Sure.
And I would like to say this, and this is only my own energetic feeling about it. Like I told you, since I was a child, I've felt very like an empath, and being around this energy and their energies, even though it's just in a spiritual form, is that there are even offshoots of those evil things that went to the good and are actually helping to combat that as well, and that there are also good sectors and parts of the government and the military and secret sectors that are all for the good, to help try and right a lot of the wrongs, to help the healings and things move forward. So, because we can't sit here and we can't blame Eisenhower or people for a choice. The choice had been made. The only way that we're going to advance is to heal, all of us as a consciousness, is heal what happened, embrace it, and then move forward with our own advanced consciousness and bringing forth our own spirituality so that we become fully conscious. Because when we become fully conscious, all these negative races and things that have come here will not be able to stay here, because the consciousness waves, the consciousness will be so high they'll not be able to stay here. They'll actually go insane and they'll have to leave.
That kind of raises a very interesting question about the timing of this short movie release, and of course the efforts to create a full feature version of this. Is the movie, the short, kind of like really something that's going to be a catalyst for opening up more people to the truth of some of the things we've been discussing? And is that also part of the kind of transformation we are seeing? Because there are many people who are talking about at this moment that we are witnessing a kind of behind-the-scenes civil war between white hats and black hats, and more white hats are kind of like exerting their influence, and more black hats are kind of defecting to the white hat side. So are we really witnessing a kind of monumental transition in our global society as well as American society?
Yes, and I will tell you, people who have seen the short or read the book who knew nothing of this story literally came to me in tears and said, I had no idea that this planet was actually being looked after by beings of this intense light and love that they were actually here caring for us, and we didn't even know it because they're so wrapped up in the dark stuff that goes on, being implanted by the news and all of that. I mean, I've never watched the news because all it does is it gets into your consciousness, and then you start to feel negative all the time. Mm-hmm. So if you can stay positive and you can just work on yourself spiritually and grow spiritually, that's how we're going to raise up the consciousness so that everybody everybody starts working with their heart, and we can get back to love, peace, and unity. By the way, when I had my spiritual awakening, I was taken and taught by master teachers in my dream states, and I started writing all about it, and over 25 years, I wrote a book, and both these books are out, and they correspond exactly, which is sort of what's happening with Stranger at the Pentagon. So Stranger at the Pentagon is sort of like a little entree to the big dinner, which are these books, because these books are the universal hierarchy in conjunction to raising consciousness on planet Earth of a program that comes out of Melchizedek, and is raising everyone up. And we've seen, especially since the 70s, the consciousness has really raised considerably, and a lot of people are having a lot of spiritual awakenings that I know of, and in my circles. These books are called The Autobiography of an Extraterrestrial Saga. The first one is subtitled I Am Tehran, who is one of the college professors at Melchizedek, who is part of the design of the programs of living light that come into Earth to help raise consciousness here. And book 2 was just released last December, called Waking Tehran. And that website, if people want to check it out, is autobiographyofananet.com. And they can go and read about it there as well. And there's a little book trailer, and they can get autographed copies of the book if they want from me off the website, or it's on Amazon on Kindle as well. So that's a whole nother giant sector to everything that we're talking about, Michael. And it's sort of it's taking the unknown universe and making it a little more known, so people will know what to expect when we start to join with it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you mentioned, according to Dr. Frank, was that Valiant Thor, since March of 1961, has been here behind the scenes, trying to help move the planet forward. He's maintained communications with various presidents, and of course has been kind of working directly with Dr. Frank up until 2008, and kind of working with you behind the scenes. So is it possible then that at this moment, we have a new President Obama, and is it possible that in some way Valiant Thor is communicating or helping with that administration, kind of like take a more positive approach to things?
It's absolutely possible. I don't know if that's the case, but I would think Obama would be open to somebody like Valiant Thor.
There were a lot of rumors that basically at the beginning of his administration, Obama surrounded himself with people that were pro-disclosure, who occupied important advisory positions, and that in the first kind of 6 months to a year of his administration, there was this effort to kind of like push for disclosure of some of this information, but that basically the White Hats lost at that time, and those that want to keep this information secret prevailed, and of course Obama ever since has kind of like been a disappointment for many people, including myself. I mean, I was a very big supporter and very enthusiastic about Obama and the people he had chosen who occupied all of these important positions, but essentially nothing happened. So now I'm wondering, we're in the last 2 years of his administration. We are at a kind of transition point. in human history. Your film, the short is out, a feature length is going to be coming out. More and more people are kind of defecting from the dark side to the white hat side. So is it possible that, sometime in the last 2 years of his administration, Obama can surprise us all with some kind of disclosure announcement?
Well, I sort of have looked at this. I know Steve Bassett well, and all of his efforts throughout the years, everything that he's tried to do. And for an administration that has not come forward for all of these years, it's kind of hard to say, oh, they exist all of a sudden. How do you really do that? And how do you do that it's going to benefit everybody in the world, so that everybody doesn't say, I hate you, government, for concealing this lie, right? How would they come about that? I'm sure that that's the problem that they face, and maybe it's movies like Stranger at the Pentagon and Steve Bassett's constant pounding out there to do it, and just with the release of all the papers that were just released from Project Blue Book. And that we know that there are several military people who are elderly who have gone on camera and told their stories about extraterrestrials, and when they pass, that these will go out into the public. And that there are many people that have already come out and spoken that we all know of. Our astronauts, military officials, everything that went on when Steve Bassett held the disclosure hearings. All of this is out there. So really, in the big scheme of things, I have always tried, because I'm in the business and I also teach acting, you always look at both sides and try and understand where they're coming from. So really, if you were the government and you were the president and you were trying to hammer all of that out, what would be your case and how could you do it so you wouldn't have a backlash of people hating as well? But how could you do it that it would benefit the world instead of getting a bunch of hatred drawn towards you? So I think that's their dilemma, but maybe all of us doing these kinds of things, it's like I said, Hollywood will not make a movie like Stranger at the Pentagon. They would make him Captain America, right? And it would become something totally different. It wouldn't be a spiritual movie anymore. That's why I'm doing it. And that's why I will also direct the big feature film as well, is to keep those spiritual aspects and the actual point of view of Valiant Thor and the crew members and Eisenhower and Nixon. All of that is very important, that we keep that intact and not make it into a new Captain America type of thing. But maybe it's these kinds of movies, and when a movie like this becomes hugely successful, then Hollywood will make 1 million more just like it, with a spiritual message.
I think it's very important to point out that your movie, Stranger in the Pentagon, it really is a pro-disclosure movie. It's not like a lot of the sci-fi movies that kind of take us into this fantasy realm or possible things, Captain America or Star Wars or Star Trek, and this kind of fictional world out there that kind of in a sense makes it possible for one day the government to say, oh, we've discovered life on Mars, or we've discovered life in some distant galaxy. How great. Now all of a sudden we know we're not alone. Answers are being given, and so now they can kind of embark on a brand new quest to discover about life out there. Your movie basically is a pro-disclosure movie because it says, hey, we've had contact in the 50s and this was not told to the people. A massive lie has been told to the people. That was wrong. And terrible things have happened. not so much the President Eisenhower, but we know to the Kennedy brothers, and then Nixon was removed, and who knows what other things had happened. Marilyn Monroe, her death, I don't
Right.
think was accidental, and it was related to this too. So I think your movie is probably going to be the first of a series of pro-disclosure movies that really transforms the planet.
It will, and in the end of the feature-length film, there is an incredibly huge, beautiful message that will help transform everyone, all involved, even the characters within the movie, but everyone on the planet will be left with this incredible message that I can't wait to shoot those scenes, because I know that I don't think there'll be a dry eye in any theater when that part's on the screen at the very end. And then, of course, at the end of that movie, we'll have a summation of where everything is today, and including Dr. Frank's death, and that the ship is still located at Lake Mead, and where everyone in the script, what happened to them after the fact, because we only concentrate on those 3 years at the Pentagon when he was there, and Dr. Frank's meeting with him, and then Dr. Frank starting to then go out and talk about it on shows like the Long John Nebel Show, who was the Art Bell of those times. Everyone, George Van Tassel, everyone was on those shows way back when. So it was incredible.
So anything that you would like to leave us with, any kind of final words, advice to people that maybe are still new to this idea of human-looking extraterrestrials having visited us and actually had high-level dialogue with important world leaders, including sitting American presidents?
Well, again, it's just to start off slow. I know when I began my spiritual awakening and I started delving into books on this subject and things, I sort of got overloaded and my circuits got a little out of whack, because I was like, wow, you could go way, way, way down into the rabbit hole and keep going. And if you find that you're losing yourself too much in it, is go back to a normal life and just sort of take little small doses of it, but to just keep an open mind about it, because this is one gigantic universe where even our scientists are discovering new planets, new solar systems, life forms. We've had many, like we talked about earlier, our astronauts, everybody else coming out and saying that extraterrestrials exist, that they know this, they've seen them. There's military people who have seen documents of officials who have met with them, etc. McElroy, I think Massachusetts, has a video on YouTube where he saw an actual document confirming Eisenhower met with human ETs out at Edwards Air Force Base. So there's all of this, and to just take it all in slowly, like a grain, but to remember to keep your heart open as well about it, and to just, if we're going to all make it on the planet, we really have to grow, and we really have to work towards merging our duality, our light and our dark, our hate and our love, and letting those come together, so that and that's really understanding emotion and what drives emotion and what drives us if we get angry and jealous, examining that, and then coming from a balanced standpoint instead of acting on those emotions with others, just creating more and more karma and more pain for everyone involved, is to just start healing situations, and that's really what I want to do with these projects. So
So anywhere in particular people need to go if they want to learn more about the movie project or to support the Stranger in the Pentagon full feature
Sure,
film?
yes. Stranger@thepentagon.com. We also have a Facebook page, Stranger at the Pentagon Movie. Our Twitter is at Pentagon Thor. And the autobiography of an extraterrestrial saga, my two books are autobiography of an ET.com. The Twitter's auto bio of an ET, I think, something like that. And we also have a Facebook page there as well. But there's a lot of videos and there's a lot of different things as well that people can see on the Stranger at the Pentagon website that I put up. I put up a short little video about the storyline. I put it up several years ago. And in the past 2 weeks, we've had almost 20,000 hits on it. So the story is actually really getting out there into the public now, with a lot of people that have never heard about it.
Well, thank you, Frank, for sharing some really amazing information, and look forward to the full feature film coming out soon. Thank you, and
I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Sala.
That was Craig Campobasso sharing information he received from Frank Stranges concerning the latter's alleged contacts and communications with Valiant Thor. His information is intriguing, especially the claim that Valiant Thor had direct communications with at least 3 presidential administrations led by Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Nixon. If the information is accurate, then it is likely that Thor continued to communicate with presidential administrations, including that of President Barack Obama. If so, then we are likely to hear more in the future, especially as Craig's feature film is completed. Thank you for listening to this fascinating interview.